All right, welcome back to another episode of Phoenix Edge. This is an RPG and gaming news podcast. My name is Hat.
And I'm Eric.
And I am Stan.
And today we are going to be talking about the Final Fantasy VII Remake demo. In particular, Eric's going to be giving his impressions with actually playing the demo. I just got off work and Stan did as well. We're in different time zones here, so Eric was able to actually give it a shot. And so he's going to be giving his thoughts. Me and Stan have watched the demo, so we're going to be able to conversate a little bit, but we're primarily going to be relying on Eric's thoughts and impressions with the demo. And then possibly earlier, but most likely next podcast, me and Stan will give our thoughts on the remake demo as well. So lots of remake stuff coming in the next two podcasts. We're also going to dive into a recent financial meeting with investors that Square Enix had, in which they stated that the game is going to be, or future games are going to be cross-gen. And so we're going to get into what was specifically said and some of the interesting tidbits around that. And then we're also going to be talking about, a little late to this topic, but it's pretty interesting. Atlas has been doing this survey regarding which games of theirs they want their fans to come to other consoles. And they had the highest turnout on the last survey, and a prominent thing on there was Persona 5 coming to the Switch. People want that, and they've kind of talked about that a little bit with IGN as well. So we're going to dabble with that and see where that takes us. And then we're going to have a Discord question, or two Discord questions. One from Decoy Manta that says, no matter how good a game's writing, systems, or music, if the visuals are lacking, then it can make the whole package a hard sell. In your opinion, what are some games that you think are great, but are let down by their presentation? And then Demosthenes says, on the flip side of that, as gamers who grew up through the N64 PS2 eras of awkward changes from 2D to 3D, how high do graphics rate for you on the scale of importance and what you look for in a game? And then kind of adds a little tidbit there. She says, I know for me personally, as long as it doesn't make me motion sick or eyes bleed, I'm usually fine with not the best graphics. The rest of the game is fun. So very, very good topics here. And we're really excited to just go ahead and dive into these. So why don't we start off with Eric and just kind of give us your thoughts on the 7 Remake demo.
Oh boy.
No. Are they positive or negative?
A mix of both.
Okay. Well, what's
some
of the stuff you like? Let's start off with that, and then
I'll start off with the stuff I like.
Okay.
First off, obviously, I love the UI presentation. It's obviously really good. The game runs very smoothly. There was no slowdowns in any of my encounters. I do like the way the system is set up overall. The combat, I think it is a nice mix of action and role playing in it. I didn't think the banter between the two characters was that bad. It kept getting I think it got a little out of hand here and there, but there were some good lines between Cloud and Barrett, particularly.
Okay.
And
this was like non-cutscene scenes, right? It was just the kind of banter they had while playing the game.
Yeah, a lot of it's banter.
Okay.
Even then, Barrett was like showing a little bit of his humor side and stuff like that. So there were positive aspects to get out of it. I won't trash it so much. If we want to go to what I didn't like,
let's do it.
I think the biggest complaint I have so far with the game is, as much as I like the combat system, there were some things I had a lot of trouble with in the game. So when you first start off as Cloud, everything feels great. I love how you can evade things. I like how you can guard against things. You watch the enemy's movements and, strategically plan around that. And I thought that's pretty great. And it has these cool modes. But as soon as I got Barrett in the party, things already started feeling out of hand. I do like that you can switch between him and Cloud on the fly and do commands to characters without having to switch. but if I want to use the guard scorpion fight as an example, there was so much going on that you have to do between the two characters. And I don't mean too much, but what I'm saying is to get the guard scorpion to a staggered point, it felt like I had to rub my stomach and pat my head at the same time to successfully uh, transition between Cloud and Barrett and getting the staggering going, while at the same time dodging all these mechanics that are happening. So it's expecting me to go through the menu, even though the menu freezes, you still have to pay attention to what's going around you in the area as soon as you're done with it. And that, I don't know if I just need to get better at the game,
Yeah.
but that felt so chaotic
This
to
is
me.
this is
That,
interesting.
why am I having to deal with all this stuff at once?
This
It's crazy. It makes me go back to thinking that action games and role playing games just can't mix. It has to be one has to be dominant over the other.
right.
Like Kingdom Hearts is dominantly an action game, but it has role playing elements to help make the action experience better. Final Fantasy 7 and 15 before it are trying to find this sweet spot that for RPGs and action games that can coincide at the same time. And right now, based on what I played, and maybe if I get better, I'll get more into it. But I'm very skeptical of how this combat system is going to work out in the long run.
That's very interesting because, obviously me and Stan, we haven't had a chance to play the demo yet, but definitely plan on playing it tonight after this podcast. But one of the biggest things that I've seen with the all the trailer footage and all the gameplay that we've seen is that we were all really impressed with what we saw with the gameplay. And that was one of the biggest things that we were concerned about was, is it going to live up to the turn-based predecessor? And I've actually heard your same comment from some other people as well, that they felt like the battle system wasn't quite honed in. However, I've seen some people point out, and I think rightly so, that, hey, this demo's been up for a while. By the time the game comes out, they might kind of tweak it a little bit for the final version, especially after that day one 15 gigabyte patch we all know is going to come. Did it feel like something they could, that might be tweaked a little bit and it would kind of even things out for you? I know you said that maybe it was just getting more time with the battle system might kind of alleviate that as well. So maybe a mixture of those two.
Well, there is an easy mode and then the classic mode that you could switch to if it feels too much. It's the difficulty doesn't bother me so much as the intense amount of microman. Let me put it this way: the intense amount of micromanaging you will have to do, while also dodging enemy attacks, making sure to know where the weak point is, switching between targets constantly, having to switch to other characters to do things. Like when I was trying to escape from the bombing mission after the boss, there came out these shock troopers that had really high defense, and then there was these turrets up in the air also. So I had to get Barrett out. All right, I'll get Barrett out. I'll go shoot the turrets. But at the same time, these shock troopers are destroying Cloud. So I go back to Cloud and I get back in the defensive position, and these turrets above now start getting up on me. So I'm thinking like, okay, can I make Barrett just slowly take those turrets out while I try to take care of these shock troopers? And I feel like it wants me to focus on the staggering of these shock troopers. I mean, it felt confusing. It didn't feel seamless. And I appreciate that there's a level of strategy to it, but when you're doing common enemy fights, it should be kind of like a rock, paper, scissors thing in your head. You're like, okay, do that, do that, do that, done, go.
Yeah.
But like it felt really chaotic.
I wonder,
like everything, because there is the art of guarding and evading these enemies on top of that, and I feel like I'm wasting the hell out of potions and cure to
Yeah.
keep everyone in check, especially Barrett.
yeah, I want, it's kind of interesting from what you're telling me, because I wonder if they're process with designing this demo was, okay, let's make it a little bit more difficult than it's going to be in the game, because the last thing we want and the biggest concern we've heard from people with this game going action oriented is it's going to turn into just a bunch of button mashing and, no strategy. So maybe they want to show in the demo that the game does have a lot of strategy, but maybe it's tweaked a little too far. But maybe they know people have to sit with this for the next month, so they want to give you a well-rounded view of the battle system as much as possible in the demo. I wonder if the actual game will not be to this degree. Maybe they'll tone it back a little bit.
Yeah, I'll give the combat credit. It doesn't feel too button mashy. There are times where it may a little bit, but it does encourage you to take advantage of the staggering system, even on simple enemies, to quickly take them out. So there is, and it is easy enough to go to your command menu and hit that. I couldn't find the macros. I don't know if there are macros in the game, but I would love a macro where, like, I just hit the commands I want already, so I don't have to focus on the command menu as much, especially if I'm playing cloud primarily. I would have to check again if that's in the game, but like I said, the combat isn't bad. The combat system, I just there was just a lot of times it felt chaotic, and like I said, maybe playing the game more I'll understand things a little better, and maybe there are things I can do that I didn't understand before that'll make it a lot easier.
Yeah.
But first time playing the demo, I had a pretty rough time with the boss itself. I constantly had to keep pouring potions and cure magics on me.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear that it's not too easy, because that was something I was concerned about too. Like, if I had to choose, I'd rather it be slightly cumbersome. Maybe I might have to sit with it a little bit, as opposed to. I'm glad to hear that you didn't just like button mash your way through the entire demo without even, thinking about it.
Yeah, I wanted to see everything in it. And one thing I do like, definitely in the combat, is the triangle button you press. Like, when you do it for Cloud, it switches him to a different mode that he hits harder, but he hits a lot slower also. So when an enemy gets into staggered, I'll switch to Punisher mode and I'll go all out, because Punisher mode is really good offensively, but it leaves you open to getting attacked a lot more because you're a lot slower. So you want to switch back to the common or to the normal mode. But when you stagger, then you pull the Punisher mode out and you just go ham on the enemy. I do see the potential for a lot of strategic elements in it, but I'm just thinking to myself, what happens when we get 3 party members and we get a lot more abilities and stuff and more equipment and more things need to happen? I feel like I'm hoping it's not the case. I hope it's well balanced, and this demo is just like not the best representation of it. But I feel like it could potentially be a chaotic mess. And I hope I'm wrong, because I really want to see a combat system like this work. But I'm just very skeptical about the idea of action games properly working with RPGs. It's one way or the other.
Yeah, it's always a struggle for them to try to blend the styles. Did you get to use any of the magic though, the materia?
Yeah, you pretty much have to use, but you don't have to, but you pretty much need to use the magic to kill these enemies without having it take like 15 to 20 minutes to take it down. Like, there was this one enemy, I forgot the name of it, but it's one of the robots, and if you shoot magic at it, the stagger bar goes up a lot higher. So when you hit it, then you go back to your melee attacks.
What? So watching some of the footage, I was gonna say, watching some of the footage that I've seen, I've kind of been interested in this. Like, what are your other characters doing? Because it looks like they're auto battling, but I haven't had a chance to play it. Are they just doing is like Barrett just doing his basic attack until you control him, or like, is there like a gambit setup that you noticed at all, or how does that work?
during the boss fight, he kept getting hit. Like they kept doing this missile track attack, and I saw him keep getting hit by it. So I felt like I need to switch him out and put him somewhere else. But when it gets the big attacks, like the Guard Scorpion does this ability where you need to get behind the wall before he shoots off his laser. And all you need to do is just get behind the wall, like I said. Barrett his AI does tell him, go behind the wall.
Okay.
You don't have to put Cloud behind there and then get Barrett and get him to go behind there. He'll react to that accordingly. But I think in the heat of the moment, I think these NPCs are going to get hit a lot. So I think you're going to be utilizing, like when we eventually get Eris, I assume she's going to be like the go-to healer, very likely.
That's my. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think she's just going to be the go-to healer, and a lot of times you're going to switch to her, and you're going to have her just like focusing on curing people and constantly switching back. So, if getting hit a lot isn't intentional by design, then I have a feeling a lot of people who are not good at the game going to be on Eris most of the time. And
see, that's one of my concerns is that in Xenoblade Chronicles, as much as I love that game, there were parts of that game where I just played with the healer because especially when Charlotte was my only person that could heal. When she would overheat her rifle, like you couldn't use the healing spell, if I remember correctly. So I just switched to her because she kept overheating her rifle on her own. And as a result, I wasn't able to play with the other characters until I got some other, different characters in there and more abilities. And there was a little variety added to it. So I kind of wondered that with the 7 remake, if it's that chaotic, if once I get Aerith in the party, if I'm just going to end up playing the game with her, I don't know.
Yeah, and just take note again, people. I only played the demo once. That was just my first time experience with it. It didn't feel that natural to me to get into it, but that doesn't mean I won't be able to. It's just going about it again, playing the full game, see where it goes from there. The story, though, it is basically the bombing mission. We know this. One thing I didn't notice before, and it really irked me the wrong way, and I don't know if I should say it in here. Even though I'm sure most people here will be playing the demo anyways. So it's going to take me just like a minute to say it. You can cover your ears if you want, but I'm sure it's no big deal. So there's a part where Cloud plants the bomb. The boss fight happens. You run away, and while we're midway running out, the bomb goes off, but it was a dud. Like it wasn't big enough. The explosion wasn't big enough to damage the reactor. So President Shinra's been watching on a security camera the entire time, and this act here, and he decides to have the robots come in and destroy the reactor and blow it up, thinking, and
the president of Shinra has nothing better to do than to watch the security cameras.
Even though Avalanche thinks they did it, they didn't. I'm like, what?
Oh, so they didn't actually, because I've watched like the footage that was leaked online, but I kind of I dipped in and out at certain parts. So you're telling me that they didn't actually blow up the reactor like they thought they did, but they didn't.
I think the explosion is not big enough to actually. It may damage part of it, but it's not enough to actually cause the full destruction that you see afterwards, or for that matter, the full destruction that actually happens in the original game. So, yeah,
I think it just damaged it, but it didn't actually destroy it.
I think they're trying to tone it back because they don't want the main party killing all these people.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about it yet. I'm gonna have to play it. And
did.
So, I get your point, Eric, is that whether they did or didn't, they intended to. or they, you know, so it's kind of like, you didn't actually do it, but
you tried.
yeah,
Right.
in your mind you did. You're still a
Right.
psychopath.
So we'll eventually get to the part where President Shinra is like, ha ha ha, it was actually me that destroyed the reactor that you were trying to destroy. So, and I can just imagine the group being like, thanks, I guess. Our whole point is to destroy the Mako reactor so you stop, sucking the life energy out of the planet. So, thanks.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I necessarily, I'm with Stan on this. I'm not sure how I necessarily feel about that because on one hand, I'm like, okay, I get it. Like it makes sense why Square would do that. They're trying to like downplay them like being actual terrorists in this day and age. That makes sense. You don't want that. You don't want a controversy. I get it. I'm like kind of okay with it actually. Like that's kind of a smart move, Square. If you could change anything, change that. But, and I think Stan, you kind of brought this up a couple weeks ago, I think, but I'm not sure how that plays with Barrett's character arc because, he has that moment in the original where he's like, I hurt so many people. And I mean, if he comes to terms with the fact that like, oh, he didn't, maybe they could still have that moment. And maybe it's something like, I wanted to hurt so many people, but it's not quite the same thing,
Yeah, they've kind of taken the edge off of it is kind of how I feel about it right now.
I don't think it's like ruined yet. I have to see how it plays out, but it is different.
It's kind of the same idea, like the same, like he didn't think of the consequences, right?
Right.
But they've definitely taken the edge off of it for the audience because the audience is now aware that the destruction caused is not fully their fault as it was before,
Right.
And it kind of makes sense from Shinra's perspective. Like from Shinra, it's kind of still true to like how they acted in the original, right? Because later on they drop an entire plate, right, to try and destroy Avalanche, and they also intend to frame that on Avalanche in order to, make people afraid and like more reliant on Shinra, right, for their safety. So it's really they're just kind of fast forwarding that plot point like to the very beginning, like making the audience aware from the very start that the Shinra are willing to destroy their own assets, and hurt their own profits in order to frame Avalanche as like this great threat, so that when they take out that threat, people will the people of the city will be, like even more reliant on the Shinra, right?
Not just for takes some of the shock value out of the Sector 7 incident.
It could, yeah, because you're like, well, they've already done this sort of thing in the very beginning, right?
Because here's the thing, they establish in the game before that happens that Shinra is a good place. They help the people. They, they may have higher ups who, are not necessarily good people, but you see that gray area where they're helping the people out with this energy that they shouldn't be allowed to harness. And Avalanche starting the thing, it makes it makes you think to yourself, is Avalanche justified in what they're doing? Because that it may be sucking life out of the planet, but it's making things prosperous for people. And then you see the people who profit from this like just go off and destroy it and then blame Avalanche. They could have just let it happen and be like, well, it's Avalanche who did it, just like the original story, and the story would have proceeded in those same steps. So when Sector 7 happens, you're shocked and awed because now you see that what extents that Shinra will go through to take out a small group. And granted, it'll still be there, but it feels like they added some unnecessary steps to get there.
It's kind of interesting because there's multiple routes they could have gone, and I think, Eric, everything you said's correct. I totally agree with. But I mean, if they wanted to, kind of toned back the incident, why didn't they just add a scene where, I don't know, they hit the evacuation bell or something and everybody ran out of the area?
I think
And then they blew it up.
I think that you're mostly right, that it's mostly done for I don't know, political reasons, or kind of like from the company's perspective, right? Like they had a problem, a plot point in the original game that kind of in a post 9/11 world, people think would kind of, it's received differently, right?
Right.
Today than it is back when the game came out. And so they probably thought about how to get around this, or if they could change it. And they determined that they could change it, and they could have Shinra destroy their own reactor because it's consistent with what Shinra is going to do later on in the story anyway, right? When they destroy their own um, sector, right? And try and frame it on Avalanche. So you're going to get the same thing. You're just going to get it much earlier in the story. But then also, how Eric pointed out, that's going to take the surprise factor away a little bit from the Sector 7 plate. Although that is a much bigger incident, like an even further step, right? Now you're not destroying property, you're like literally destroying people's homes, like the street they live on, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that they wanted to do it for sales reasons, or kind of reception of the game reasons, but the justification they're using is, well, this is consistent with the Shinra company, right, or President Shinra as a character from the original, right? This is something that he does later on. We're just kind of moving that plot point forward and like kind of seeding it in the very beginning of the game.
I think this actually kind of works now that I'm thinking about it, and I think everything we're saying here is true. It is going to make the second plate fall. It's going to be less of a surprise. Yeah, they're downplaying it, obviously, because it would be a weird controversy if that became a controversy in this day and age. Why do you have the heroes as terrorists? They're probably looking at just the current climate, so that makes sense. But honestly, like, I think it kind of helps in a way, the plate falling on, the Shinra sabotaging his own city, because that was quite the leap before. Like, oh, I'm just going to blow the plate up and just like destroy this whole sector, right? Whereas, like, if they kind of early establish that he's willing to do this type of stuff, someone that's just playing the game new, they're probably not going to think that he's going to do it to such a great degree. That probably wouldn't even think to them. He might think like, oh, they'll just, sabotage them some other way, make them look bad in some other way, but not as an entire sector. That would be
Right.
crazy. And like planting the seeds there, like, oh, like he did this in the past. Like it's kind of actually in my mind a good clue for somebody that has not played the game.
It's like a foreshadowing thing now, right?
Yeah, and it kind of makes the second event actually make a little bit more sense because it was kind of set up for the character.
It does. I agree. It does make more sense. The only thing is, and we obviously haven't played the game yet to know how it's handled, but I also agree with Eric that it is going to make that moment less shocking, right? Because like now it makes sense. It's like, well, yeah, he's done this before. Now he's like taking it a step even further, right? So
yeah, I don't know. We'll have to see how it plays out because I still think it could be quite shocking. I mean, we see movies and TV shows all the time where like the characters just upping the ante every episode, and you don't think they'll go that far, and then they do. And honestly, in the realism that this game's going to offer, it might still be quite shocking because you're probably going to have close-ups of like kids and stuff like before the plate's falling, like whole families, like out doing whatever they're doing before this plate's crashing, and like I still think it's going to have a huge impact once it does crash, because also you're having a lot more time with like Jesse, Biggs, and Wedge, right? You're getting
that's
to
true.
build relationships with those characters to a much greater degree. And so when that does happen, assuming things play out the way they do, and the the repercussions for everything that's happened at that moment, you realize those characters are gone. Like it's probably still going to have quite a huge impact, maybe even a little bit bigger, to be honest.
That's true.
So
this the thing I don't like is there's always been that moral gray area between Avalanche and Shinra. And it seems like Square Enix right now is trying to turn it from gray area to just straight black and white. They want you to establish right from the beginning, yeah, these are the absolute villains. These are the mean bad guys. Or something like that.
That's true, because the original game kind of toyed with that idea a lot, because Shinra was so bad, but then there's moments in the game where you and Shinra kind of work together almost because Sephiroth's worse. Right? So it's kind of playing an interesting role with this dynamic of good and evil.
Yeah, I think this change is probably going to be debated among the fan base for a long time, because anytime you make a change that big, like it's if you look at Star Wars, right, and in the original cut of Star Wars A New Hope, you have the scene where Han Solo talks to Greedo in the what is it, the canteen, the
Han
Tatooine.
shot first.
Yeah, the Han shot first moment, right? So in the original cut, he shoots the guy before he has a chance to do anything. But he was a bounty hunter that was like trying to catch Han Solo, right? But he took the initiative and shot the guy first, which makes him come off as kind of like a, shoot first, ask questions later.
Right, almost like kind of like a wild murdered the guy.
Yeah, it further established his rogue persona.
Yeah, like more of like a Wild West kind of vigilante status, right? Whereas later on, George Lucas wanted to portray the character differently, and he claims it's just because the editing at the time he wasn't able to do what he wanted or whatever.
But better.
Haven't they changed that scene like 4 times?
Yeah, so that like
like it's been changed multiple times.
I can tell you each time it's changed.
Yeah, they make it so Greedo shoots first, and Han kind of sees it coming, and he like dips his head out of the way, and he's able to shoot Greedo back, which turns it from a shoot first, ask questions later scenario to a self-defense type of thing, right? So it's like it very much kind of recontextualizes the character early on in the story, and now we have the same thing here, though I don't think this is quite as
quite the change.
Yeah, quite as big a change, but it is a change for sure, because like they still intended to destroy the reactor, and they don't know that they're not responsible, so they're still going to have to carry on as if their bomb caused that destruction, and they're going to still have conversations, and kind of like Barrett is going to have to justify to the team like we're still doing the right thing in spite of all the people's lives that they think they've ruined, right? So they still have to think about it as if they are responsible for that.
I'm okay with this change as of right now. I'm okay with it. Like
I'm gonna tell you,
of all the things they could have changed, I mean, like I'm fine with it. Go ahead.
This is only the tip of the iceberg of how many changes we're gonna see.
Oh yeah,
for sure.
How many things people are gonna complain about when the actual game comes out and we finish it? Oh my!
Yeah,
there will be so many complaints, and we'll be 3 of them.
This is.
I mean, you've got. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to go off topic, but I was just going to say this is taking me back to. I'm a Star Trek fan, so when I went to go see the 2009 Star Trek movie in the theater for the first time, and this is like a callback to like, a reboot of the James Kirk era, right? The original Star Trek. So they're redoing this history and like a new timeline. And there's a scene where like the planet Vulcan's destroyed. I remember sitting in the theater watching that, like, that's controversial. That's going to make a lot of people mad. Cause like this is like a planet that's been prevalent in like 5 television shows, and you just went back in time and destroyed it. So it's kind of a deja vu moment now with just seeing this change with the reactor, and like you guys are saying, realizing that there's going to be so many other controversial changes that people are just going to debate whether it actually helped the game or made it worse.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, people just need to remember this is technically like a reimagining of the story. It's a new interpretation of the story. It's not going to make the original 7 better or worse.
Right.
You can if this game ends up being terrible in every respective way, it's like it's not going to all of a sudden the original 7 be bad. It's not going to be retconned like Avalanche most definitely destroyed that reactor at the beginning of the original 7. There's nothing in there that establishes otherwise. So that did happen there, but this reimagining, this retelling, has changed it to have Shinra still be ultimately responsible for what happened.
Here's the thing, though, and I agree with you. It's not going to make the original go away, but they're announcing a Final Fantasy VII Remake World Orchestra tour, right? Where like the Distant Worlds is going to be touring, and they're going to be doing Final Fantasy VII Remake music, and that made me wonder if in future concerts, if are they still going to play music from the original game, or is it only going to be the remake versions? You know, and it kind of made me start going down that rabbit hole with this game, with like, you know, the changes they make and everything. Is the, you know, the new figurines, is it always going to be the remake designs? Are we not going to get the original designs? It's just kind of an interesting take, but you are very right in that the original will always be there, and if that's what the fans prefer, that's the one that's going to stay alive. You know.
If we want to talk about the soundtrack, just a quick tidbit on that. It's okay.
I've heard really positive reviews on the soundtrack.
I love from the original one. I love the simplicity of the tracks, and these sound just a little too orchestrated for my taste. It doesn't make them bad. It's just they don't help me as much for the intensity of the moment.
It seems like they're like very cinematic in that the tracks kind of link up with certain action on the screen, right? To try and like during the cutscenes, or like when the boss is like transitioning from a phase to another phase, like it's trying to like highlight what's on the screen, right? And you get that a lot with like movie soundtracks, where you'll have like a, you know, kind of like a crescendo, right, of music like leading up to a big moment. And it seems like they're really trying to push that cinematic aspect of the music from what I've seen.
Yeah, I guess that's the best way to put it. It's got more of a cinematic tone to it than like more of like a video game soundtrack type of deal. So I guess it's just from someone who plays old school RPGs. I just like the simple soundtracks, but it's still good for what it is. I'm not bashing the tracks themselves. It's just it felt a little underwhelming while I was in combat. That's it.
Interesting. Well, I'm excited to play it. I mean, we were all predicting that this was going to come out around this time. I think originally we were thinking it was going to come out tomorrow, right? So
yeah, because that was the release day.
Yeah. So this is kind of a nice surprise. I mean, Square's always doing it wrong with like their various announcements, and, you know, having like a 2-year anniversary stream for Final Fantasy 15, only to like cancel a bunch of stuff on the stream. Like they're so blind with like what people want. It's kind of cool that they got at least this right, that okay, the game's was supposed to come out now, but it was delayed a little over a month. Okay, we'll let the demo go live then. You know,
yeah,
that's really cool.
Also, they dropped it very unexpectedly, rather than like announcing the date that it will come out. And I think that is probably better, because now you have all kinds of people playing it out of the blue and like being very surprised, right? So you have like a lot of word of mouth going around about the game, right? Rather than like announcing a date ahead of time, you know.
That's true. I mean, if we knew that it was coming out like today, there would probably been a lot of people that were like, think about it and like, I'll play it next weekend or I'll play it in a couple days. But now that it's like they're just seeing on Twitter that, oh no, it's out right now. And they're like, oh crap, what am I doing tonight? I guess I'm playing the game. You know, like it's kind of it's a good move. Yeah. Just want to point out here, Cobb's Fighting Room said that initially they played the demo for the first time and they had an issue with some of the gameplay, but they played it like 4 times now, and they're starting to get like the combat's starting to click with them, and they're kind of starting to get it. So, and that's kind of what Eric had said. Like he only played it 1 time. If he plays
it's more concern.
Yeah,
it's more concern for how much the micromanaging is going to be a thing when the game plays more. All we have is like 1 to 2 spells per character and 1 to 2 abilities. Just when that thing stacks even more, it's like you are going to have a lot to deal with while dodging these enemies at the same time. And I will also argue that, like I said, this is my first time playing it. It might click by the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th time when I play it, but shouldn't it click the first time? Isn't that good design? Where it just absolutely clicks with you the first time.
No, man, it's the Dark Souls of JRPGs.
I would argue even Dark Souls clicked with me quickly. It was just the boss himself. It's kind of like a Star Fox Zero situation where people didn't like the separate controller you used to do the aiming and the other stuff. And Nintendo's response back was like, just get good and you'll like it. Don't worry that it feels overly complex for its own good or anything. Once you get used to it, you'll like it. If a developer comes to you and says you'll just get used to it, once you get used to it, will like it, there is an inherent flaw in your design. I'm not saying that about FF7 Remake. Let me make that clear. It can be entirely user error, and I'm just dumb and slow. But that was just my first time experiencing it. There is a lot going on just between 2 characters and all the enemies in the room in the boss fight.
So you heard it here first. Eric hates the 7 remake. Completely 0 out of 10. Just trash. That's basically what Eric just said. So make sure.
I wonder if the classic mode would, if you would recommend that for people to try out. Maybe that would alleviate some of the chaotic nature.
I'll try the classic mode, and next time we talk about it, I'll give my thoughts on that.
Yeah, because that's supposed to handle all the attacking and evading and blocking like by the characters, right? And you're just like strictly picking commands when the ATB is available.
I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through it the first time in classic mode because I'm a classic guy. And then at the second time, because I'm going to play it more than once, assuming there's no timer on it. If I play it all the way through in classic mode and then it like tells me I can't play it again, I'm going to lose my mind. But somebody in the comments said they played it 4 times. So I think I'm good. So I'm going to play it through classic mode first time, just kind of see how that goes. And then I'm going to go to the more complex, what's it called? Normal, yeah. Man, that's so condescending. But whatever.
Well, I would say when the main game comes out, no matter how much better easy mode or classic mode might be, I am playing it the way the devs intended.
You kind of have to in order to accurately judge, right? Like the game as it was made.
Yeah, but they're saying like, classic mode, like it's too complicated for your old brain to handle. So you need classic mode for you old players.
Because I've seen stuff before where people are like, oh man, the game was too easy. And then they say, well, I did have it on easy mode, but it shouldn't have been that easy on easy mode. It's like, then put it on normal.
Yeah.
I've never heard anyone say that, but if they did, that's ridiculous. I wouldn't say an official publisher said that, but I've had friends. Why is it so easy on easy mode? That's funny. I like that.
It should still offer a level of challenge, which they're right, but if you really need that extra challenge, put it back on normal.
Dude, that's just an opinion and you're not getting any sympathy on. I'm sorry. It's easy mode. It's supposed to, but I get it. Maybe they want more ranges, like not quite. Whatever. We're getting off on a tangent. Very cool. So me and Stan still need to play the demo. Eric's going to play the demo some more. So on the next podcast, we'll talk more about the demo and kind of give some more thoughts on it, and probably some more in-depth thoughts, because demo just came out today. Eric was only able to just get through it. Me and Stan haven't been able to, so probably still forming our thoughts here. I want to go through it at least a few times before we talk about it again. So that'll be the next podcast episode. But we still have more Final Fantasy VII Remake stuff to talk about. No fear, for those of you that like that. So there was a announcement. Well, not really an announcement, but an investors meeting where the president of Square was answering questions from investors. And let me get the quote up here. So there was various questions that were asked. A lot of it was regarding Dragon Quest stuff, but there was some interesting tidbits regarding the Final Fantasy VII Remake, but also just their kind of philosophy going forward. So there's two questions here that we want to address. First question is, could you share your thinking on the development of new titles for current and next generation game consoles going forward? And his response was, the next generation consoles will have backwards compatibility, so we plan for the time being to make our new titles available for both current and next generation consoles. It will therefore be somewhat farther down the road that we release titles exclusively for the next generation consoles. And I'll go ahead and read the next quote too, just so we can kind of respond to both. And the secondary question was, will the change in your release date for Final Fantasy VII Remake impact your development or launch timelines for the next installment? They said, no, it will not. So I think the big takeaway here is that
there'll be so many other things that will delay that next installment.
Well, whoever asked that question, did he actually expect this guy to be like, they don't currently have a release date out now, so you have no idea whether it actually impacted it? But did they really expect the president to be like, actually, we're planning on it coming out next year, but with this delay, it's coming out 2 years from now. Like he would never do that. He would be like, no, it's still coming out on time. But anyways,
well, the first topic when they talk about the cross-gen stuff,
yeah,
I totally called it. I just knew they were going to do this, and it makes sense too if you think about it, because it's not like a jump to PS2 to PS3 where it's just a completely different graphical powerhouse and different processors and everything like that. The PS4 to PS5 is essentially a PC upgrade. And the worst thing the developers have to do, which I can understand may be a pain, is they just have to optimize the system for PS4, PS4 Pro, and PS5.
Yeah.
And besides that, though, I mean, I don't see why they can't cross-gen.
Well, I agree. I mean, here's the thing, though. Like, when I'm reading this quote, it's a very interesting quote because he mentions backwards compatibility, which we kind of speculated on, right? But he also states there'll be a time farther down the road when games will not be developed for prior consoles, but exclusively for modern consoles. So I got two things from this, right? Number one, obviously, like Eric, you already kind of hinted at, but in the same ballpark, this isn't simply going to be, they're not going to simply have remastered versions of games necessarily. Like they're pointing out that newer consoles have a new feature with backwards compatibility. So he's not just saying like remakes like we've had or remasters like we've had on prior games. And he's also not pointing out that they're having like Zelda Breath of the Wild on the Wii U and then the Switch. They're not saying that type of thing because we've already seen that a lot. They're pointing to a feature that current consoles or next generation consoles are going to have, where like Eric, you're talking about, where it's going to be more like almost like a PC. And what I find interesting about this is that Microsoft, like we don't really know how Sony's backwards compatibility is working at this point. All we know is they've confirmed PS4 at least, right? But we don't know in what way is that going to work. Microsoft has said with their console, they're requiring, at least for first party consoles, that first party games, and they're going to support it for third party, is if you buy a game for an Xbox One and it also comes out on the new Xbox, if you buy a new Xbox and you stick the old game in the new console, it's going to automatically play the best version of that game. So you're not going to be required to buy the game twice. Whereas,
that is very awesome.
Yeah, so like right now, if you want The Last of Us remastered, you have to buy, like, you may have already bought it on the PS3, but then you got to buy it again on the PS4. So like when I heard that, like I was like, that's a great idea, but it makes me wonder if did Square just accidentally like announce that like how Sony's backwards compatibility is going to work, or did they just announce that this game's they didn't say it directly, but is this game coming out on the Xbox? Because they're pointing to this backwards compatibility like it's a new feature. And as far as we know, Sony's backwards compatibility is basically the same as it's always been, with like the first launch PS3 that would play PS2 games. Sony hasn't come out and said like, oh yeah, if you buy a PS4, if you buy Cyberpunk, well, that's maybe not a good example, but if you buy Witcher 3 on the PS4, if we come out with a remastered version on the PS5, if you stick the PS4 version in your PS5, it'll just play the PS5 version. Like they haven't said that, right? So it's kind of an interesting omission. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it's kind of interesting.
Well, two things. One, I do eventually think they'll drop the PS4 entirely and focus primarily on the PS5. Because right now there's over 100 million PS4s sold. So it would actually kind of be silly to not cater to an extent to them also.
Right.
Until they get the PS5 up and get that train going on the PS5. But on the other thing you mentioned with the backwards compatibility, first off, awesome on Microsoft to do that. I like the idea that a game I had is going to have the best visuals it can if I'm on a different console.
They're requiring it for first party only, by the way. They said third party, they can support that if they would like to, but they're not requiring third party developers. But I think there'll be a lot of pressure for them to follow suit.
Right. So then you have now they can make a marketing out of this. Sony releases the PS5 and they start gradually getting their famous PS4 titles and and then marketing and saying, "Oh, hey, we made a graphical patch for PS5. This is your opportunity to play the game again." And then they'll sell like a greatest hits version of, like, let's say God of War. They upgrade God of War graphics and everything and loading times and stuff like that, the whole shebang, and 4K native. And they're like, this is your chance to get God of War right now. And they'll release a greatest hits version of it and they'll make more money in software sales from games they released years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a brilliant marketing strategy.
Yeah. I mean, go ahead, Stan.
Especially they can also advertise it as like, stick in the disc you already have, right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously certain developers are not going to be happy because they've been in this kind of like Goldilocks zone where, like Square, where they can sell me Final Fantasy VII 5 times, and I keep buying it. So if obviously this is going to catch on, I think, and that's going to kind of put it into that until we go all digital, anyways. But it's kind of a weird thing though, because initially the idea was that the Final Fantasy VII Remake, if it was going to come out on the PS4, they were simply doing that so they could have, well, there was multiple reasons, but one of the reasons being so they could have that PS5 release also down the road and make more money because they'd be selling you the game twice. But if PS4 compatibility is going to work the same way like it does with Xbox, then that means that everyone that buys it on a PS4 they're just going to play it on the PS5 and not have to buy it again.
Yep.
Right? So that's cool from a consumer standpoint, but I know that Katase has said in an older interview that his goal with the 7 Remake was he wanted this game to be as technically impressive to this current generation of gamers as the original was when it first came out in the 90s. So it's kind of like when I read that quote, I was like, it's too close to the PS5 coming out. And like Eric pointed out, eventually games, they even said it in this quote, further down the road, games are not going to come out on the PS4 anymore. They're going to be exclusively made for the PS5 or the next Xbox, which implies that there's a reason for you to do that. I mean, if it's just like a PC thing, then scalability is a thing. Then why wouldn't you have the game always be able to be played on the PS4? Eventually, the games are going to be doing stuff that you cannot do on the PS4. Well, you need the hardware of the PS5. And if that's the case, I'm hoping the 7 Remake 2 at least is hitting that quote that Katase said where it's using the full power of the PS5, because I mean, if there is a point in the future where the games are not going to be coming out on the PS4 anymore, then at some point that is a kind of an anchor to whatever degree, however that impacts the game, it is impacting it somehow. So it's kind of it'll be interesting to see how this develops.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
It's funny he makes that quote, Katase, because I guess the thing looks great now, but people think it'll look like crap in 20 years.
Or people will think the first game looks dated in like 2 years because you'll start seeing PS5 games that were exclusively designed for the PS5.
Look at the blocky looking characters that you did on the PS4. It's nothing like it is on the PS8 now.
Dude, I guarantee you the Final Fantasy 7 Remake, when it comes to PC, they're going to have mods where you get to play Cloud as like a super like blocky character, but it's going to be like, fully proportioned, but just played like the original.
And not only that, will it be the definitive edition?
Without a nose. So anyways, very, very cool stuff there. Next topic, and we're just going to breeze through this now. We have the Persona series, essentially Atlas, and this is actually more wide-ranging to all their franchises, I believe. But they do this survey where they just ask fans some of the things they want. A lot of companies do this, but on this particular survey, they were asking which games would you like to see on other platforms, and there was a lot of response to the Final Fantasy VII Remake. I've been saying that so much today. The Persona series coming to the Switch, so much so that Atlas actually said this was the biggest response they've ever gotten. I think it's primarily because it got a lot of press and a lot of people are going to take this survey. It was a survey only in Japan, but there is a lot of attention with people wanting the Persona series to come to Switch, at least Persona 5. IGN ended up asking Atlas about this, and they said they were aware of the desire for a port to the Switch, and they asked fans not to give up hope. And I kind of follow in suit with this. About, 8 months ago, there was a quote from the president of Sony Interactive Entertainment, who said that this was the Japan division that said the Persona series is one of the Japanese IPs that can compete internationally. The IP has walked alongside the PlayStation ever since the first entry in 1996. I hope that we can continue walking together in the future. The title of the article is Sony Interactive Entertainment says Persona exclusivity is very important to them. So the big question a lot of people have here is, why has the Persona series, at least one of the games, the main franchise, or even the Shin Megami, I guess those games are on the 3DS. So let's just stick with Persona games. Why have they not come to the Switch? And some people have speculated, well, it's got to be exclusivity here. It seems like they have it with Sony, but Atlas is kind of hinting that it's possible in the future. You guys have opinions on this?
I guess definitely for like Persona 4 before the Switch was even a thing.
Mm-hmm.
But when Persona 5 was developed, it was intentionally designed for the PS3 and PS4. The PS3 and 4, and I don't know if there's any technical reasons why they can't get Persona 5 on the Switch or anything. I don't know if they got a Switch engine similar to Dragon Quest did, but I have a hard time believing that they wouldn't jump on the Switch immediately and get like all their Persona related titles on there. Because right now the only way to play Persona 4 Golden is on the Vita. Imagine if you were able to get that version on the PS4, the PC, the Switch. It's like that's a game that needs to get back out there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and same with Persona 5, it's like it's free money if you get that game on the Switch. Even people who got the PS4 version will buy it again.
Yeah, I mean, like maybe there is some kind of technical limitation, at least with Persona 5, but I mean, I don't think so. I mean, they put Ni no Kuni on the Switch. There's been lots of PS3 games that have come to the Switch, so I don't think it's too difficult. They could definitely do it, and we've seen lots of ports of earlier games like Dreamcast games, PS2 games, etc., coming to the Switch. So I don't see any issue with them being able to do it if they put effort into it. And like you said, it's free money, and I think like the Persona series being ported to the Switch makes total sense because those games are very easily, like you can play them for like 20 minutes and put it down. Like it's not something where you have to sit there and play it for 3 hours straight. I guess unless you go into a dungeon, but you can do a lot of the social link stuff, with just playing it for like 10 or 15 or 20 minutes. It doesn't require, a console experience to do that stuff.
Yeah, I would personally put all 5 games on the Switch. I would get maybe the PSP version, the Persona 1, 2. I don't know if they were popular with people or not, but 3, 4, and 5 most definitely. You can get the FPS version from PS2 and HD remaster that. Persona 4 for the most part is already remastered. I think you just got to bump it up from 720 to 1080.
Sure.
Is all you got to do. And then you got Persona 5, which has a PS3 and PS4 version. Worst case, you could give them the PS3 version. But then again, there's the Royal version. Wouldn't you want to sell the Royal version to people?
So I think the underlying thing here is that there's probably, we don't know this for certain, but it seems like Sony hinted at it, that they have some kind of exclusivity deal with Atlas on these games. It's not permanent, so it could be in the future. Atlas even said, don't give up hope. So I know a lot of times with exclusivity deals that, these like Sony will have with, or Nintendo will have with these companies, is one of the things they'll offer is they'll give a significant discount on distribution costs, meaning, or the royalty fee, I guess. Distribution is not a good word, but the fee they have to pay Sony to have the game come onto their platform, right? They'll give them a huge, Sony will take a smaller portion basically, and it makes it worth their while. Sometimes they'll help with the development costs, etc. And these games are stuck on a console for however long.
That kind of confuses me though. Isn't Persona Q 1 and 2 and
well, there's probably stipulations. Like you can do spin-off games, like because Square used to have the main Final Fantasy series only on PlayStation, but they would have like the spin-off games on like Nintendo, right? So
yeah.
But thing is, I wonder if Atlas, if this is where they're at, if Atlas signed this exclusivity deal before the Switch came out and before they realized how popular it would be, and they just thought this was a no-brainer, because I mean, to me, like, I don't know how much money they're making off this exclusivity deal, but they would make so much more money if these games were on at least the Nintendo Switch, if not other consoles as well, the Xbox and PC. I mean, it just makes like you would just make so much money. How much money is Sony paying you?
Yeah, like like Eric mentioned, Persona Q games are out on the 3DS, right? The Persona fighting game, Persona 4 Arena, came out on PC and Xbox 360 as well as PS3.
And they just came out with Persona 5 Scramble on the Switch.
Yeah, Persona 5 Scramble is out on the Switch. but no Persona 5 or Persona 5 R. So there has to, it's not, there's no proof, but all signs point to like games in the main franchise are tied to Sony in some way, you know.
Right. Because otherwise there's no other real reason to keep it exclusively on Sony's platform.
Really not. And maybe even further than that, Sony wanted Persona 4 Golden in particular exclusive for the Vita in order to try and really sell the hardware, the Vita specifically, you know, because why hasn't that come to like PS4 even, you know?
Yeah, and I know that a lot of times developers will release these side games to kind of build up an audience on those platforms as well. So to your point, Stan, I mean, eventually the exclusivity to the Vita, whenever that runs out, like I think they're planning on having this come out once that contract ends. But I have to think like the exclusivity to the Vita and like the Sony for Persona 4, that can't still be a thing. I mean, it's been how long? Like 8 or 9 years?
Yeah, I wonder if their exclusivity deal that they have is just like
The whole series, like,
for the franchise, and maybe Atlas saying, you know, don't give up hope is them kind of subtly hinting. They can't say it outright, but maybe they're subtly hinting that that deal is coming to an end soon, and so
yeah.
they're using this survey to kind of gauge interest so that they know they don't necessarily have to renew that deal with Sony, right?
Well, even like we said earlier, the president of Sony Interactive Entertainment said that I hope that we can continue walking together in the future.
Yeah.
So,
that implies that maybe it's coming to an end soon, although they can't explicitly say that.
Right. It's kind of,
but I don't know for sure, but
well, it's kind of like the same thing that we saw with the 7 remake, where Microsoft released that advertisement, that trailer saying the 7 remake was coming to the Xbox along with other games. And then they had to pull it down. Yeah. And then they had to say like, oh no, that trailer was a mistake. We accidentally made that trailer. Like, and it was like, you accidentally made all this video footage. Like, they're like, yeah, we have no plans of this game coming to Xbox. Very clearly, you know, Sony has a deal where they like, you can't talk about it coming to the Xbox until this date, right? And like Microsoft was like, crap, we just screwed it up. So, I mean, it's probably a similar thing with this where, you know, they want it to come to the Switch, but they just can't say definitely. Yeah. Anyways, I predict that we will see after Persona 5 Royal. I think that, you know, I think E3 this year we'll see a Persona game announced for the Switch. Whether that's a remaster of an old one. Oh, I think that's definitely what it would be, a remaster of an old one or Persona 5. I can't imagine.
Inevitable.
Yeah. Because if they're telling IGN don't give up hope and all this other crap, like, I mean, dude, like it's planned. They want Persona 5 Royal to sell well on the PS4. They don't want people to hold off for the Switch version.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And I think like this summer at E3, they'll just that's the ace in the pocket for Nintendo, or one of them anyways. Persona 5 Switch.
That would make sense because I don't know if Nintendo really has. I mean, they could surprise us, which they kind of do a lot. But after like Animal Crossing and then Xenoblade Chronicles coming out, maybe possibly in May or so, we don't really know what Nintendo has planned for as far as like big games like coming after that.
Yeah.
So maybe they're working on Persona. Who knows?
Yeah. I mean, who knows? I mean, not from Nintendo, but I'm sure Octopath Traveler 2 from Square and games like that. But yeah, they'll need a big surprise, because last year was pretty dramatic with The Witcher and, you know, Zelda and everything. So,
yeah.
Cool. So we have some Discord questions here we're going to wrap things up with, and let's jump into it. So first question, well, we're just going to read them both because they're very similar. From Decoy Manta, who says, No matter how good a game's writing, systems, or music, if the visuals are lacking, then it can make the whole package a hard sell. In your opinion, what are some games that you think are pretty great, but are a letdown by their presentation? And then from Demosthenes, who says, on the flip side of that, as gamers who grew up through the N64, PS2 eras of awkward changes from 2D to 3D, how high do graphics rate for you on the scale of importance and what you look like for in a game? So again, first question is just, what the game had everything else going for it, but the visuals were lacking, so it made it a hard sell. And then on the second part of that question is, how do you rate graphics with your overall importance of the game? Where do you place that? So I have some thoughts, but I'm curious what you guys have. If somebody wants to start us off,
Go ahead, Stan.
or I can. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, sure. The ones that come to mind are typically those early 3D games, right? Because in particular, if they're trying to portray like more of a real aesthetic, real, like simulate, like not, they don't have necessarily like a strong art style to them. They're not stylized, but they're the early 3D PS1 N64 games that are trying to push the graphics, right? They were trying to push the graphics at the time, trying to make them look really good. So this doesn't really apply to something like a Super Mario 64, right? Because you're putting cartoon characters in a 3D world, right? So it's not really an issue. But for something like Legend of Dragoon, which is the one that came to my mind, that game was trying to be, pushing the graphics at the time, and it just hasn't aged well.
Right.
I remember at the time, I wasn't even that impressed with the graphics because you had other things like Final Fantasy 7 and Final Fantasy 8 out already.
I was impressed, but I remember being impressed with the cutscenes. The cutscenes were really impressive.
The cutscenes are much better because they're they're pre-rendered, but and those are good. So yeah, like Legend of Dragoon comes to mind. Chrono Cross comes to mind, but to a much lesser extent, and I would say only certain areas. Kind of like where you have like really wide shots with like lots of characters on the screen, kind of from a distance. It's like you can see kind of, it was very pixelated, even though it was trying to portray like more of a 3D real environment, I guess.
Yeah.
And I mean, any 3D fighting game like from from those times, like those just don't look good anymore. Although I don't know, you're maybe a little more forgiving with a fighting game because you have lots of different animations that at least look cool, like the characters are able to do all kinds of more things on screen. But like in Legend of Dragoon, the characters models are, I don't know. I'm not phrasing my thoughts here very well.
I understand what you're saying. Like when you're playing a fighting game, you're not sitting there just looking at it. Like, but whereas with an RPG, there's a lot of downtime where like you're not doing anything and you're watching the screen and you're watching characters talk.
Yeah, two characters are talking to each other and you're reading text, but then also you're looking on screen and it's not looking that great, So.
Yeah. That is a jam that I hear right now. Anyways.
So yeah, those are the ones that come to my mind, is those early 3D games.
For me, I was kind of going to think the same thing with the retro RPGs. Just a lot of the old, like especially Western RPGs, like you would see kind of on like the Sega Genesis and stuff, that would try to go for this like hyper realistic look at the time, so the character models would be very proportioned. It doesn't look very good now, and I don't see too many people that are very reminiscent of that style, like they are of the more JRPG style from that era. But I was going to also point out on a kind of separate side, a lot of indie RPGs these days, I think they're fantastic, right? but they're a difficult sell because they're clearly lower budget. And I'm not talking about like the pixel art stuff. I'm talking about like a game like Edge of Eternity. I streamed on this channel, which it's kind of like a cross between Xenoblade Chronicles and Final Fantasy, and its kind of vibe. But it looks good in terms of like it looks like a great PS2 game or an early PS3 game. And that might be a turnoff for some people, but you have to realize it's an indie game. It was entirely self-funded, right? It's not like a studio, and it's an RPG. It's got Yasunori Masuda doing the music, so and that took a lot of money as well. So it's the money is there. It's just, and it's a good game. You just have to get past that old school look that some people might be wanting to see, right? And so that's one thing that came to mind. And then on the another flip side here, I remember when Lost Odyssey was announced, there was a lot of unfair comparisons between that game and Final Fantasy 13, right? Because people were like, "Oh, Sakaguchi's making Lost Odyssey," and then the like competitor Final Fantasy 13, like side by side screenshots. I'm like, dude, come on! Like Square has this like studio that's used by like movies, right, for special effects, and like Sakaguchi's over here like getting like funded by like multiple sources, and like it's not even like the same resources to make this game, and it still doesn't look that bad. But there was certain people I saw that were like, "Oh no, Final Fantasy 13, it looks way better," and I just thought sometimes you see
the character designs of 13 are much better than Lost Odyssey. Lost Odyssey has a really awkward design to all their characters, to a weird. I guess you just have to look at the full cast of Lost Odyssey to see what I'm talking about.
Right.
It's like
the costumes, right?
Yeah, like the costumes particularly, and if you see like the character artwork, I actually think the character artwork is kind of ugly looking. They have some weird exaggeration of the characters and their portraits, and it's kind of aesthetically unpleasing. To be fair to FF13, the characters look good. So I mean, if I want to give a compliment to 13 today, I'm fine with their character designs.
Yeah. Eric, do you have any games or era that we didn't mention that you felt would kind of go in line with that first question, like a game that?
It's kind of hard to say because I grew up when these games were graphically relevant.
Yeah.
So it's a hard question to answer, but I mean, I think the N64 pretty much brings me back to this because there's a lot of times, even when I was a kid, like I played both Castlevania N64 and Ocarina of Time. And I tell myself, why does Ocarina of Time look so amazing when Castlevania doesn't look anywhere near as good?
Right.
And granted, the game was okay. Castlevania 64, it definitely doesn't hold up today by any means, but it was an okay game back then. But it's a very ugly game, even for its time.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one of those games that you kind of had to give a chance. But I don't know. I guess the early PS1 era is another thing. If I could just think of
I mean, I can't think of any like modern games that look ugly, like, and they're actually ugly. They're not like Undertale or something that's trying to look stylistically ugly.
I will say also, Dreamcast has a lot of games that definitely don't look like they hold up well today. Skies of Arcadia definitely has a unique art style to it, but the graphics they are very outdated looking if you're someone playing it for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a game that has really good mechanics. It has a great story. You definitely got to play the GameCube version, I think, because they fixed a lot of stuff from the Dreamcast version.
Yeah.
But I think that's like a type of game where where by today's standards, it's graphically not pleasing looking, which is why a lot of people are demanding like a remake for it. Because that is because imagine that type of game with like Valkyria Chronicles like graphics.
That'd
Yeah.
be awesome. Yeah.
That would be amazing. But I think that's a game that's worth a look at, even if it's not the prettiest game to look at today.
Yeah.
But but on the answer to the first question, I think aesthetics are ultimately the most important thing for me at the
Yes.
end of the day. So if it's not the most graphical powerhouse looking game ever, that's certainly not a deal breaker for me. I'm glad Hat brought up Edge of Eternity because yeah, that does look like an early PS3 game, but there's a lot of concepts in that game that looks very that looks like something I can easily get into, and I do actually look forward to playing that when like the full version comes
Right.
out.
Getting there.
So I think you should at least, if it's not the best looking game ever, I think you should at least look into mechanically or how the world is structured or word of mouth. It might actually be a hidden gem for you.
Yeah. As far as, whether or not the aesthetic is important to me or graphics, and we've kind of gotten to this field here with the second part. I mean, I'm not really concerned with detail as much as I think I'm concerned with like, was the art style fully realized? So it just depends on what the intention is, right? So like I love the way Octopath Traveler looks, and it's not hyper realistic, but it's fully realized, right? When they designed that game, that's what it was intended to look like, and there's no limitations. And I think it's great. I love the way Final Fantasy IX looks, to be honest. I don't really have too many issues with it. There's a lot of indie sprite-based art, pixel art games that I just love the way they look, and they're not overly complex, so they're fully realized. But when it comes to like a game that's intended to look hyper realistic and it's made with that vision in mind, like I like in the same way. I like to see that game in the way it was intended. So I can play Witcher 3 on the Switch. I put like nearly 100 hours on the Switch, but I would much rather play it on the PC because it looks so much better. And I'm like, this is the way they wanted you to play it. And so, but I don't need, Octopath Traveler to look like Witcher 3 in order to enjoy myself, right? Like that's like I don't require that. I'm just like whatever the art style is going for, as long as I feel like it was fully realized, I'm happy. And if the hardware is holding it back, then I'm going to prefer to play it on the optimal system.
True.
That's why Mario 64 still looks pleasing today, and a game like Bubsy 3D doesn't. It's it's realizing the art style and the but and just making sure it's as aesthetically pleasing as possible. I wish more companies would aim for that. Like I understand that you're in the today moment, but companies I think should at least look at their product and be like, is there anything we can do to like some type of stylized thing we can do with it that make it stand out more and it become more timeless over the years. Like there's plenty of Super Nintendo games that hold up greatly because they have this incredible like aesthetic art style to them that still makes them very pleasing to play today. That's a little more of a tall order on N64 and PS1.
Yeah.
But then you get games on the PS2 also that still look really good today. Like Dragon Quest 8 still looks phenomenal if you upgrade that to HD.
Yeah. Well, it's
Like,
the PS
looking game.
the PS2 is kind of a weird thing though, because like certain games, like when you upscale like Final Fantasy X, for example, like the environment looks really good, but I think the models look worse.
Because
Like
you notice the
eyeballs and like, yeah.
yeah, and they have like that game in particular, they have different models for the characters. Like they have a higher detailed one that they use in certain cutscenes.
Right.
But then in the background, like you might get like the lower detailed models.
Oh my god, I hated that so much. I've talked about it in the
Yeah.
podcast before, but it's one thing if you have like one scene where you're not using full animation, and then like and then a different scene where you're using full animation. But
Right.
Square Enix was most famous for this, for the Kingdom Hearts games and Final Fantasy X in particular. They would have during the scene them constantly switch between their full animated faces and then them just like lip flapping like this, like
Yeah.
and they like have a completely different. They have a cardboard face, I call it. They switch constantly between that, and I'm like, I'm fine with one, I'm fine with the other, and I'm fine if you want to use one in certain scenes and one in certain other scenes, but stop using both of them in the same thing. It sticks like a sore thumb, and it's terrible looking.
Yeah, it was an issue even back then. Like, but like Had is saying, on a CRT TV as the game was intended, it's probably less of an issue than it is when you upscale it now today, right?
Yeah.
It's like
It looks...
pops out even more so.
Oh no, you notice it with a CRT TV.
Well,
Especially you can argue that with Final Fantasy X, but Kingdom Hearts, you can see when their faces are animated, because that game is more cartoonish animated looking than Final Fantasy X. Final Fantasy X still, for the most part, has pretty still characters for the most part, until there's like certain action scenes that call for something different. But like Kingdom Hearts is always animated and funny looking. So when you see Sora going like, "Hey guys, what's going on?" and then like the scene pans to Donald Goofy, and then goes back to Sora, and then he's like, "Okay, let's go on a adventure."
Like
it's
stone faced, yeah.
The stone face. It's like they use it in the same scene, and you can see it clear as day. It's awful, absolutely awful.
Yeah, it's I don't know. Some people have speculated, like, are we going to get this like resurgence of like nostalgia for the PlayStation 1 and PS2 graphics? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't think so. Like we got it for the Super Nintendo.
If the PS5 is backwards compatible, I think we're going to see a renaissance of old games.
Yeah, but I don't think they're going to like, dude, I prefer the way GoldenEye looks on N64. Like, I don't think there's going to be people like no face, so much better. You know, like
honestly though, if PS5 rumor is true and you can play PS1, the PS3 games on it, all those games and retro collecting is going to skyrocket.
Oh yeah.
Because everyone has a console that can play them again.
Especially if, you know, I can go buy The Last of Us on the PS3 for like $5 at a used video game store, and then I put it in my PS5 and it does the PS5 remastered version.
the super director's cut.
Yeah, I'm like, because then you're getting a great deal for like $5. That's going to really raise the value of games. But yeah, it's exciting. I can't wait to find out more. So, but good questions, Decoy Manta and Demosthenes. Really appreciate that. It is definitely different. So we're definitely looking for more questions. Just come to our Discord server. There's a link in the description. Go in there, click on it, and there's a thing, podcast questions. Usually you'll see one of us in there on a weekly basis. What questions you guys got? But yeah, come in there, ask us some questions. Next week, we're going to give some more thoughts on the Final Fantasy VII demo. This week, it was mostly just Eric, because Eric's the only one of us that has actually played it. And but between now and then, we'll all play it again or a couple of times, and we'll have some more detailed thoughts. But I think that's it for this week. Am I missing anything, guys? I think that's it.
We just want to give a shout out to RPG Fan, like always.
Oh,
right?
Yes.
Our partners.
Yes. So. Thank you, Stan. Yeah, our media partner, RPG Fan. By the way, I did the voiceover for their Fire Emblem Three Houses DLC review. So I recorded the voiceover for the review, and I supplied the game footage because they gave me the code to record footage. So I didn't write the review, so keep that in mind. If you disagree with those thoughts, direct that frustration elsewhere from me. But I pretty much agree with the review. It's a good review. I've been having a good time with the game. So, but definitely go check that out on RPG Fan, their YouTube page, and you can see me with my voiceover. So, cool.
Very cool.
All right, guys. We'll catch you all next week. Take it easy.
Take
See you
care.
next time.